Hey everyone, it's Stacey with my Learn to Sew series. Today we're going to be making a tote bag which is lined, and it's really cool because we're not going to see any of our raw edges inside. It's going to have a really nice professional finish. On mine you can see I've got an applique, and if you'd like to do an applique, please check out my previous video where I go over that. All the instructions will be in the description below, but let's get started. First thing to do is always press your fabric and then we'll start cutting. So for this project we're using a fabric for our outer and a fabric for our lining, and we need to cut them both exactly the same. So I'll start with my outer fabric. Just pop this one to the side. And instructions on how to cut your fabric, four instructions on how to cut fabric with a rotary cutter if you're not familiar. You can check my video, the link is above, and I go over the basics of cutting fabric. But for this project, we need to cut 2 2¼ inches by 30 inches. So I'll just open those up. We need to cut them to 30 inches long. So I'll just line them up, marry them up. You could cut them one at a time. I'll just roughly marry them up. Then I'll cut off the selvages, and then I'll just line it up on the bottom here, just measuring to 30 inches. So that's one set of straps, and then we want to cut our larger piece at 17 inches wide. And I've got my fold here. And that's important because we're going to use the fold as part of our pattern. If you didn't have a piece this big, you could just sew 2 pieces together to get it big enough, but we're using the fold. So we want to cut that at 17 inches. And then we're going to cut it at 18½ wide. And then I'm going to do exactly the same with my lining fabric. So now I've cut out all my pieces. Let's move on to our straps. But first I plan to do an applique on mine, and if you'd like to do an applique too, please check out my previous video. What I plan to do is I plan to applique this quilt club with Stacey Lee, which is part of another course that I do teaching quilting, onto my tote bag. So what I'll do is I'll line that up, bearing in mind that I'll lose about 3/8 of an inch at the top. So I'll line it up so it's evenly spaced at the top and the bottom and the sides, and I'll have that all done before the next step when we sew the bag together. So I've got all 4 pieces of fabric here that I cut for my straps. Now what I'm going to do is take one of my outer fabrics and one of my lining fabrics, and then I'm going to place them right sides together. And what we want to do is line up all the edges, and we're going to sew along both sides. So for me, I just think it seems easier just to place a pin in the middle, which means I can come down this side and then down this side. You don't have to pin if you're comfortable not pinning, or you might want to pin properly. When I say properly, you might want to do one side, sew it, and then pin the other. Just do whatever works best for you. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew down one side, then the other on both straps, and I'll check my sewing machine is stitching nicely. I'm going to stitch at 2.5, and I'm going to stitch with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So that might be something you need to work out on your sewing machine. and I'm stitching at stitch length 2.5, which is a standard stitch, and I will do a back stitch just so it doesn't come undone when we're trying to turn it right sides out. So I'm going to stitch all the way along this one edge. And I will do a back stitch just because I'm not entirely sure exactly which end I'll be turning right side out. Then I'll turn it around and come along the other side, and I'll do this for both pieces. Okay, so when you've finished that, let's just cut off all the loose threads so we're keeping it nice and tidy. And now we're going to turn our straps right side out. So I'll just move my sewing machine over. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take a pin and we're going to pin it on one side of the fabric. So I'm pinning it on this side, coming up through the center and then closing it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take the top piece and pull it down and push it in. And we're going to push that end of the pin down so you've got a little bit of it here ruched, and then we're going to pause and we're going to grab where it first started to ruche and we're going to pull it gently on either side. Now one of my members found this really tricky, so I'm going to try and show you the best I can. So we're just gently pulling that away. So now there's no ruched bit anymore. So now I'm going to take that head of the pin and carry on pushing that through. And see, I've got it ruched again. Now I'm going to gently push that up and over again. So I'll push it up and it's all bunched here, so I can just stop and just pull at it, and then I'll push that up and right over. So now it doesn't look ruched again. I'll find my pin again and then I'll push it right down until I can see it come out. And I've got that last little bunch, and I'll just pull that up, and now we're seeing the strap and it's all pushed up here. I'm not going to keep pushing from the bottom. I'm going to grab it here where it needs to come undone and push it. So if it gets bunched like that, pull it from the bunched bit. Did you see how that just then came undone? And then we push it all the way off until we can see our strap. So we have to do that for our second one. So we're going to pin it on one side. Oh, it wants to go through both. There we go. It's on one side. I'm going to take that head, turn it and push it down inside until I've got a whole big ruched piece, and then from the top here where it started to ruche, I'm going to carefully pull it on the front and the back, and then I'll push the pin down some more, and then we're pushing it again. See how it's gone into a big clump here? I'm going to start right at the beginning here and pull it over and off. And I'll find that pin again and push it right the way off. And now I've got that funny big clump again, so I'm starting at the top, pushing that off, easing it off. And there we have it. Both straps are done. Now we need to press. So now what we want to do is we want to roll these seams out so they're sitting as flat as they can possibly be. So I can see that's a really nice flat seam there. We don't want there to be like a crease inside like that, and then press, because then we'll be losing part of the width of our strap and it just won't sit nicely. So we're going to roll it out until it's sitting really nice and flat, and then we're going to press. And when we press, we just want to press this side. We don't want to press the whole strap because we still need to go across and do the other side. So let's be really careful just to stay on this one side. So this is going to take a bit of time, but it's going to be worth it. So get that sitting really nicely. Press just on this side, coming along, and we'll do that to all 4 sides. We can give it a bit of a finger press to help it stay in place before we press. So as you can see, I've done my applique, and if you'd like to do one, please do it before this next step. If you're not sure how to do an applique, please check out my previous video and the link is above. But what we're going to do now is open up our outer fabric and then put the right sides of the fabric together, and then we're going to pin along this edge on both sides and sew it, and we'll do that for the outer and the lining fabric. So I'll line up these edges, this edge and this edge and the corner, and then I'll pin. Remembering, some people don't like to pin, they're confident enough to not pin. Some people like to use a lot of pins, and it's really just a personal preference. I think when you're learning to sew, it doesn't hurt to use as many pins as you need to. And then we'll do the other side. I'll line up that corner, this edge, make sure they're all sitting nicely. Okay, now we're going to sew down both sides. So I'm going to stitch at stitch length 2.5. I'm going to have a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and I will do a back stitch when I get started. I'm coming up to the edge here and I will do a back stitch. Then I'll sew along the other side. Now what I'll do is I just will give these corners a little trim so they're not too bulky, and I'll cut my loose threads. So I just cut the corners at the bottom of the bag where the fold is. So I just trim those off for when we turn it right sides out. And then now I'm going to do exactly the same with my lining fabric. I'm going to open it up and place the right sides together, pin and sew along both sides. So now I've got my outer fabric, I'm just going to turn that right sides out, and we'll just give those corners a push. You can use a point turner or something blunt, just so they're sitting nicely. And then we will just give it a quick press so that those edges are sitting really nice on either side that we just sewed. So I'm just going to roll out these seams and give them a press. And I'll do that along both sides. Okay, now let's attach our handles. So now we're going to take one strap, and if you wanted to, you could have done a top stitch on either side. It's not necessary, but it might be something you'd like to do. But now we're going to attach them, and I want my straps to be the peach on the top and then the mustardy colour on the inside. So I want them to be sewn together like that. So that means I have to turn it down so the peach is facing the peach. And I want it to be not twisted. So I'm going to place that there. Don't worry, we will measure it in a minute, but I'm just making sure I've got my peach facing my peach. And then I'm going to pull on it and make sure that it's not twisted anywhere. And I'm going to come around, and then I'm going to place it down around here anywhere. Like I said, we're going to measure. So I've got peach facing peach on both sides, and I can just check again that it's not twisted anywhere. We don't want it twisted so that when we sew it, we find that the strap is twisted. I hope that makes sense. So once you're sure that your strap is fine and it's not going to come out twisted, let's measure it so that on either side it's 3.5 inches. So it measures 3.5 inches from the edge of your bag to where the strap will begin. And then let's place a pin in there. Now I can see that that's sitting nice and straight. I've got my ruler there lined up on the edge of my bag, and then I'm lining up my strap with the edge of my ruler, so that's nice and straight. So I'm going to pin that. I'm going to give it 2 pins. Then we're going to come to the other side, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to measure 3.5 inches from the edge of my bag. Make sure that's lined up on the edges, my ruler, so that I can make sure my strap is going to be pinned nice and straight. And then I'm going to pin it. So when I'm pinning it, I am lining up the edges of my strap with the edge of my bag, and I've only got one layer of my bag. Then when I'm happy that that's looking good, I'm going to turn it over. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing on this side. So I'm going to make sure that my peach is facing my peach fabric. Pop that down, and then I'm going to hold it and make sure that it's sitting nice and flat and not twisted in any way. And now my peach is facing my peach. So that looks good to me. You can kind of flatten it out if you want to double check it's not twisted. And when you're happy, we'll do exactly the same thing. We'll measure 3.5 inches from the edge. Then we'll take that one layer of fabric and pin it. And we'll do the same on the other side. Okay, and now what we're going to do is we're going to attach our outer fabric. Now if you wanted to at this stage, you could stitch these straps down so it's not as fidgety. I like to just do it all in one go, but it's entirely up to you. If you did want to sew the straps now, I would suggest doing them at about 1/4 inch seam allowance so we can cover up where you have done the stitches. But for me, I'm just going to carry on. I'm going to take my outer fabric now, and I'm going to place my bag inside it. It's a bit fiddly. So we're placing our bag inside our outer fabric. And now what we want to do is we want to line up both the seams for the lining and the outer and the edges of the top here. So I'm going to find my first 2 seams, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to nest them. Now this is a quilting technique, but it works fantastic for this bag. So I'm having the fabric for my lining facing towards me, the seam, and then I've got the fabric for my outer fabric facing away from me. And then what I can do is I can line them up inside here and then push them together, and what they'll do is they'll lock into place. When they're locked into place, I'll pin them I'm going to pin them on this side and on the other side. And then I'll find the other two seams and do exactly the same thing. I'll have the lining fabric facing towards me, the seam facing towards me. I'll have my outer fabric facing away from me. And then I'm going to line up those two seams and I can feel them nesting together. And when I'm happy that they're sitting perfectly, and those two seams are just sitting perfectly together, nested, I'll pin them on either side. And when we've done that, now we can pin all the way around, except we need to leave an opening to turn it right sides out. So what I suggest we do is we're going to leave an opening between the straps on one side, and I think we should do that on the back. So starting with that first strap, we can make sure all the seams are lined up, hold the strap really carefully and just remove the pins, and then reinsert them, making sure we're now going through all the layers. So now I've got the lining as well. I'll do that to the other side, making sure all these edges are lined up, the strap's firmly in place. Okay, and now I'll do the other side. And I just will pop in an extra pin in the middle here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start sewing where my opening is. Remember, there's no pin here in the middle, so I know that's where I want to start my opening. I'm going to start here. I'm going to go all the way around, and once I've known I've sewn all 4 straps on, I'll stop on this side. So let's sew. So starting at our opening on this strap here, I'm going to start before my strap begins. Pop my foot down. I'm going to be stitching at stitch length 2.5 with a seam allowance of 3/8 of an inch, and I'll start sewing, and I will do a back stitch. And then I'll come up to my straps, remove the pins. And then what we can do just to reinforce the straps is just do a back stitch over them and then go forward again, just so they're extra strong. Coming up to my next strap, remember, don't be afraid to just stop and pause and readjust things so everything's sitting nicely and flat, especially your working surface. So I'm going to stitch right over my strap, and then I'm going to back stitch slowly so it's nice and straight, back over it to reinforce it, and then carry on. So this is my last strap here, so I'm just going to stitch right across it, securing it. I'm going to come right past and then back stitch. And then stop. So I'll just cut those loose threads. And now what we'll do is turn it right sides out. So we'll find our opening, pop our hand in and pull out our outer fabric and pull out the lining. And then what we do, so we can get that a bit flat, is we pop the lining inside. Can take a little adjusting to get that sitting all nice and flat. And now we can really see our bag taking shape. We are going to press it one more time, and then we're going to do a top stitch around the edge, which will close up our opening. So now what we want to do, the edge that we just sewed, we just want to make sure that's sitting nice and flat, and firstly checking that the opening, that it's sitting nicely there, folded in approximately 3/8 of an inch, lining them up so that when we sew it closed they're going to meet nicely, and then give that a press. And then we'll just turn it around and just do the whole opening. And little threads like this, you can come along later and just trim them. Okay, and then you might just want to give it one last press, making sure that the lining's sitting the best it can inside, just so it's nice and tidy. I've got to be extra careful not to iron my Cricut print. Okay, so now let's just do that last top stitch. So just finding the opening, I will just pin that shut to make sure it's sitting really nice when we sew it closed. And I'm going to start right here, right after the strap, and remembering it is a top stitch, so we stitch quite close to the edge because we also want to make sure we are closing our opening shut. So work out what the best seam allowance is for you. And now let's finish our bag with our top stitch. Up, but let's make sure we're not going to be sewing our straps into our bag. So take that first strap and make sure it's sitting out. That was close, guys. Pop your foot down. I am stitching at stitch length 3 because it is a top stitch. And then remembering I'm pausing and adjusting, and let's find those other straps and pull them up and over so we don't accidentally sew them into our bag as well. Now I'm coming up to where I started. I'll just go past where I stitched and then do a back stitch. Go forward a couple, and then we're done. So the last thing we need to do is just trim all those loose threads. And then you can just check if there's any more. I think I had one coming out of a seam, which will annoy me no end. I guess I can find it later. But what do you think, guys? There we've got our tote bag, which is lined. I think that's pretty cool myself. And I'd love to make more, especially themed, like fall and Christmas. I think there's so much fun, and I can't wait to see all your creations over on my Facebook page. Okay everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial, and don't forget, with most things in sewing you could make your tote bag smaller or larger, you could make your strap shorter or longer, and that's entirely up to you. And it's one of the best things about sewing is you can make things exactly how you want them. If you've enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate it if you'd like, subscribe and leave a comment. It means the world to me. And next week we'll be making a sewing machine cover. I can't wait to see you then. Thank you for watching my videos. If you're enjoying them, please like, subscribe and leave a comment.